We live in a world that is profoundly, deeply tired. Every evening as the sun dips below the horizon, millions of people stream out of office buildings, factories, and marketplaces. They carry the weight of a long day on their shoulders. Everyone is fighting an invisible battle. Everyone is rushing home to find a moment of peace. But in our rush to find comfort for ourselves, we have begun to lose something vital. We have lost the ability to look at the person standing right next to us. We have wrapped ourselves so tightly in our own struggles, our own exhaustion, and our own entitlement, that we have become completely blind to the suffering of others. We measure our worth by our clothes, our jobs, and our status. And slowly, silently, the rarest currency in modern society is no longer wealth or success. It is empathy. It is the simple, quiet willingness to understand a story that is completely different from our own. A few days ago, I was traveling home after a long, exhausting day at work. I was on the evening train. If you have ever traveled in a developing country, you know these trains. They are not modern. They are not air-conditioned. They are old, loud, steel beasts packed to the brim with human exhaustion. The layout of this train wasn't row by row. Instead, long metal benches lined the two sides of the carriage, leaving a wide, crowded space in the middle for hundreds of passengers to stand, gripping the overhead bars for balance. The train was suffocatingly full, mostly filled with the office crowd making their daily migration home. But amidst this sea of standing bodies, there was a glaring anomaly. Lying completely flat across one of the long benches was a woman. She wasn't just sitting, she was taking up the space of 3 or 4 people. She was in her 40s, but her face bore the deep, heavy lines of a life defined by relentless physical hardship. She wore a simple, dirt-stained frock that covered her completely. Her head rested heavily on a small, worn-out bag, and she was in a sleep so deep, it looked almost terrifying. It wasn't a casual nap. It was the total, absolute collapse of a human body that had run completely out of fuel. But the passengers standing around her didn't see a human being in complete exhaustion. They saw an inconvenience. These office workers, well-dressed men, corporate women, and young girls looked down at her with sharp, judgmental eyes. They began to whisper. They smiled mockingly at each other, pointing at her dusty clothes. Then came the passive-aggressive comments, the loud hints intended for her to hear. The irony was, most of these standing passengers didn't even look like they desperately needed to sit. They were young and healthy, but they were deeply offended by the idea that someone they deemed lower than them was occupying space. Not a single person stopped to think, is she sick? Is she having a medical emergency? What kind of day did she have to endure to collapse like this in a public train? The tension in the carriage kept building until one middle-aged man decided to become the voice of the crowd. He wanted the attention. He stepped forward, looked down at the sleeping woman, and spoke in a loud, demanding voice. He told her that these standing office professionals were going home after a grueling day of work. He demanded that she sit up immediately and give room to the people who actually deserved it. The carriage went quiet. The loud voice shook her out of her deep slumber. She slowly opened her eyes. They were heavy, bloodshot, and clouded with an unimaginable fatigue. She didn't get angry. She didn't shout back. She simply looked at the man with a gaze that could break your heart. In a voice that was barely a whisper, she said, "You're more tired than them." She slowly, painfully dragged her body off the bench. Her movements were uneven, stiff, and uneasy. As the train doors opened, she stepped out into the evening air, disappearing into the crowd. She was clearly a laborer, a woman who spent her 12-hour days doing back-breaking physical works, sweeping concrete roads or lifting heavy loads. Her body was spent, and she was right. She was more tired than them. Watching her walk away left a heavy, suffocating silence in my chest. I looked around at the office crowd. The smirks had vanished, replaced by a sudden, uncomfortable realization. But the damage was already done. This is the tragedy of our modern society. We have developed a severe condition of perspective blindness. We believe that because we sit in an air-conditioned office and deal with mental stress, our fatigue is the only fatigue that matters. We look at someone who does manual labor, and we instantly choose to look down on them. Your perspective is not the universal truth. The way you view the world is entirely limited by the comfort you have been given. True maturity, true strength, begins when you realize that someone else's unseen story might be 10 times harder than yours. The next time you are tempted to judge, to whisper, or to demand your entitlement, take a breath. Look closer. Learn to see from the other person's side. Empathy is not a weakness. It is the only thing keeping this world from falling into complete darkness. Because at the end of the day, we are all just travelers on the same crowded train, trying to find our way home. Be kind, because you never know how heavy someone else's bag truly is.